Anyway, let's stick to the US for a moment, where they've struck a plea deal with the man who was the mastermind of 9/11. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who's been holed up in Guantanamo Bay for some 24 years, or nearly 24 years, has finally agreed to plead guilty to terrorist offences for masterminding 9/11 on the agreement that he won't have to face the death penalty. Now, you have to ask the question, after nearly 24 years in Guantanamo Bay, A, why has he finally decided, I'm going to fess up? He could have fessed up at any point, but of course he would have then faced the death penalty. But you would have thought for a terrorist, facing the death penalty actually makes you the martyr that you want to be. And what is in it for the DOJ, the Harris-Biden DOJ, to finally get this bloke out of Guantanamo Bay? JD Vance, Trump's pick for vice president, was asking exactly that question today.
Today, I heard that the Biden-Harris Department of Justice cut a deal with al-Qaeda terrorist Khalid Sheikh Mohammed to avoid the death penalty. It was reported today. Now, as someone who enlisted in the Marines to serve after 9/11, that is ridiculous, but it's not surprising. Now, just think about the point that we've gotten to. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have weaponized the Department of Justice to go after their political opponents, but they're cutting a sweetheart deal with 9/11 terrorists. We need a president who kills terrorists, not negotiates with them.
Two of his co-accused have also been included in this sweetheart deal. The chief prosecutor on the case, Rear Admiral Aaron C. Ruff, wrote in a letter that in exchange for removal of the death penalty as a possible punishment, these three accused have agreed to plead guilty on all of the charged offences, including the murder of the 2,976 people listed in the charge sheet. But of course, those who have family who were killed in 9/11, you can understand, are upset by all of this. Daniel Dialara, his brother, died in 9/11. He said, I'm very disappointed. We waited patiently for a long time. I wanted the death penalty. The government has failed us. I mean, what would it have hurt them to just keep the bloke in Guantanamo Bay until he eventually carked it? They never had to get a guilty plea out of him, really. They know he did it. Just leave him there and let him rot.
The thing that shocked me is that this was still going on. I mean, I'd kind of forgotten about it and assumed it had all been, you know, taken care of and put in the dustbin. 23 years later, they're still trying to work out what exactly to do with people who murdered near on 3,000 Americans on American soil. And so now they don't face the death penalty. They'll get life in prison. We don't know where they'll be incarcerated. Although, you know, knowing the Democrats, they'll probably be put in a midtown hotel and given a credit card with $1,000 on it. That's what they do with everybody else these days. If you were a relative of someone killed on September 11, you would be absolutely outraged that your government has taken 23 years, still hasn't executed justice. And when they do, it's sloppy justice that reflects the fact that moral clarity is sadly lacking in the United States in pretty much every area.
Well, when it comes to the DOJ, when it comes to the Department of Justice, I like to say the joke's in the name, America, because it really is. Whenever these guys are like, oh, we're prosecuting this, we're prosecuting that, it was 2 seconds ago, or at least it feels like, we were talking about the DOJ against Boeing. I mean, what kind of case was that? Zero justice for the victims' families. So you've had several planes hit the ground, killing everyone on board. They get away with a rap on the knuckles. The DOJ, the very long list that I could reel off the top of my head of these cases that they say, oh, we're prosecuting, we're on the case. And then you find out what was the outcome. And nobody thinks that's justice whatsoever. And now the American taxpayer gets to pay for 3 square meals a day and a roof over these guys' head until they die a natural death.
And you can bet they'll have human rights activists and lawyers looking after their every need.
Oh, they have. That's why they've lasted this long.
But let's not forget that the terror attack that brought down the Twin Towers was organised by al-Qaeda, right? Who would have imagined in the days after 9/11 that many years later, President Joe Biden would leave Afghanistan and gift al-Qaeda billions of dollars worth of military equipment and then cut a sweet deal with the al-Qaeda operatives who trained the hijackers, financed the hijackers. One of these men came up with the idea behind the 9/11 attacks, and they allow them a plea deal, as if you would give them any deal at all.
Well, the only reason I can possibly think of as to why they would do this is at the instruction of Biden and Harris, because they think it might play well to go into an election saying we finally got an admission of guilt out of the mastermind of 9/11. That's the only reason I can think of that you would do it, but I'm not sure it plays the way they think it would play.
There's two things on that. The first one is that, far from take credit for this, and this was one of the weird things, the White House immediately put out a statement sort of stepping back from it, saying this was nothing to do with us, this is the justice system working itself out. Could you imagine Donald Trump stepping away from something like that? I mean, he would be there with the rope saying, let me be the hangman.
Well, no,
Okay,
Donald...
hang on a minute, though. He did have 4 years as president and did nothing with these guys.
Fair point, but
so if they were ever going to hang, he had his opportunity to stand there
but
with
the action's been taken
nothing.
now, and it's this administration that were very quick to put out a statement saying this had nothing to do with us. The other point about this is I think the reason why they're scared to go to trial and pursue the death penalty is because lawyers will argue that these guys were waterboarded, that they were put under duress, and that was how the confessions were obtained. And so I think they're a little concerned how it might go. But that just goes back to the fact, if you fly aeroplanes and buildings kill 3,000 people, how much legalese do you need?
But they never had to run the case. They could have just left them in Guantanamo Bay until they carked it. Like,
yeah, so now they get to stay in a different prison.
I know,
which will
be much nicer than Guantanamo Bay.
And the only difference is like, oh, thanks for the guilty plea.
Yeah, exactly. That's all they're extracting is the guilty plea. But so the admission of guilt. Yes, we say we did 9/11. But like 24 years down the line, I don't think anyone was hanging on for the admission of guilt. It would have been a better version of justice to leave them in Guantanamo Bay where they get waterboarded and tortured and whatever else until they finally die than getting the admission of guilt and put them in a proper prison.
Whoever the last person was to visit Jeff Epstein, you get him to go and visit them in Guantanamo Bay. Problem solved.